Environmental Film Festival.
Careful.
Be careful what you say. On behalf of the History Department and with support from Finger Lakes Environmental Film Festival, thank you for taking time together to join together in person and on Zoom. We're here to learn about the current crisis in Ukraine, to learn a little about how we have arrived at this tragic moment, and to demonstrate our solidarity with the Ukrainian people, as well as the many citizens of other countries who find themselves in harm's way in Ukraine. When we organized this a week ago, we had no idea how big it would get. There are over 500 people joining us from Zoom around the world. I'd like to introduce our three speakers. Yulia Sherbak, a senior at Ithaca College, is from Kyiv, Ukraine, majors in TVR and minors in legal studies. She graduated from law school at Kyiv National University with a Bachelor of Laws degree in summer 2021, and is looking forward to continue her legal education at a US law school with a focus on entertainment industry. She is joining us from Zoom in New York City. Daria Karpenko is a junior film photography and visual arts student at Ithaca College, who's also minoring in marketing and legal studies. She's from Dnipro, Ukraine, and finished 2 high school degrees, one in Ukraine and another one in Great Britain. She came to the US to study film and photography. Zenon Wazilu needs no introduction. Professor of history, has been at Ithaca College since 2 years after I graduated from college. He's a specialist on Russian, Ukrainian, and Soviet history, and has published and taught widely on these areas. He is also a very beloved teacher who has trained generations of Ithaca College students, many of whom are joining us over Zoom. At the end of the presentations, we'll have time for questions. Those on Zoom can post questions to the chat, and the moderator will send them along to me. That's why I'll be on my phone. Those in the room, please raise your hand. Our event will end promptly at 1 p.m. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to our guests for joining us as well.
Hello to all alums. It's nice to see you. I've heard a lot from all of you, and you're always part of the Ithaca College community. Telling a historian to only spend 10 minutes on something is like an introductory part. So I'm going to focus more on Ukrainian history because that's one narrative that's been often ignored. One of the issues is Americans and others will say it's all about NATO or it's about the USSR and reconstructing the USSR. NATO did play a role, but really it's not about reconstructing the USSR. If you've been following Putin and his inner circle, it's about reconstructing a Russian empire from the 19th century. Those of you who had me in class, the foundation of the state was autocracy, orthodoxy, and nationality, and a lot of it is attempted to be brought back. And in the 19th century, late 19th century, this is when you had absolutism. Ukrainian was banned from being spoken or written. This is when you had the pogroms taking place, where some of you might be here because of that reason. So, just as a context, there is history very much at play. Reconstructing an imagined past, that is very dangerous. Autocracy, you can just see the president of Russia sitting at big tables with the old Tsarist flag, only having a small circle of advisors back from his KGB days. And also there are people say he's the richest man in the world of $200 billion in wealth. I saw an interview with Tom Brokaw just the other day when the Soviet Union collapsed, and he said, I'm sorry that the USSR collapsed, but not because of any communist policy or socialist policy or progressive policy. He thought it was foolish. It was seen as a continuation of empire. Now, in coming in, we have to realize cataclysmic events that would occur in Ukrainian history. At the end of the First World War, you had the construction of new nations. Ukraine did declare independence. It was short-lived, from 1918 to perhaps 1921, but the strength of this identity, the strength of the movement, led Lenin in creating the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and offering the creation of Ukrainian Republic. There was a process of indigenization, allowing people to get educated, allowing people to flourish. This would be considered the 1920s Ukrainian Renaissance. Yes, in the Soviet Union. We've heard of other Renaissance in terms of culture and events. And the issue was, even within the Ukrainian Communist Party, you had a push for greater identity, for greater independence, and things of that nature. It was such a movement of Ukrainianism that you had even the former president of Ukraine, the historian Hrushevsky, coming back and living there because the promise was true indigenization, true equality, and things of that nature. The reality happened that when Stalin took power, you had this indigenization taking place, greater assertiveness. It wasn't only Ukrainian being taught, but Yiddish was encouraged to be taught, Polish, Tatar, and things of that nature. When Stalin came in, he was greatly worried because the people weren't becoming ideologically communist in many ways. And so you have a change in policy, and in order to crush, how can I put it, civic initiative on the part of the Ukrainian village, you have the introduction of an artificial famine, taking the food away. And it wasn't just an attack on the farmers, it wasn't just an attack on control, it was also an attack on any idea of autonomy, because with archives just opened up, we've learned that there was armed resistance on the part of the Ukrainian peasants, on the part of Ukrainian farmers. And so even though over 4 million people perished, it was really quieted. And what's interesting is the first American scholar to start studying this, James Mace, who was a friend of mine, excuse me, was of Cherokee background. He saw this situation parallel to what happened to Native Americans, a trail of tears. We became good friends, and there was a lot of resistance to this. So when we talk about survival and trauma, the trauma of the First World War, the trauma of the revolution, the trauma of famine, after the famine, elites were purged, elites were sent into Siberia. So Stalin kind of has control, and then you have the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and once again, you have another traumatic effect. As the Nazis move in, we see the implementation of the Holocaust. A lot of historians have ignored that many of the lives lost, much of the brutality took place between Russia and Germany. Timothy Snyder wrote Bloodlands, and he brought up, this is where the Holocaust of Jews took place, racial categorization. With the Ukrainian population, they were considered Untermenschen, lower peoples, and were taken away for slave labor. I had 2 aunts and an uncle, 2 uncles and an aunt who were taken away. I had an uncle who perished in the Soviet army. And so there was resistance to Nazism. Some thought, oh, these are going to be liberators, and we knew that wasn't going to be the case at all. So you have this trauma over and over again. With the death of Stalin, we see Khrushchev taking over. And interestingly enough, you see a rise up again in trying to gain greater autonomy. The leader of the Ukrainian Communist Party, Sheles, will write a book, Oh My Ukraine. There was a 60s generation, poets, writers, an interest in bringing back this indigenous culture that was being crushed. Was it going to be allowed to happen? 1972, a decree came down, shut down all the Ukrainian language schools. So almost all of them shut down. That's why when you hear, oh, Russian-speaking cities in Kharkiv and elsewhere, it was part of the policy. They said no native language taught. Dissidents, activists, you actually had a close collaboration between Ukrainian activists and Jewish refuseniks at this time. and especially with the Helsinki Accord of 1975. And I'm not going to go into details, but this was an agreement by the Soviet Union and everyone to respect human rights. And so you have this activity, greater support from peace groups, from human rights groups, etc. But then, this is terrible to say, but the big blast that happened was Chernobyl. It really shows regard of the Communist Party, the apparatus, toward the general citizen, kind of a stagnation period. And then, as we know, you have 1990, 1991 protests taking place. And part of it was university students being part of the Granite Revolution, calling for independence. 1991, Ukraine becomes independent. And then in the December of 1992, in a referendum, 92% of the population votes for independence. Now, will this be a smooth transition to democracy? No, and I'm not going to go into the rise of oligarchs, the rise of corruption. But you see the rise of a civil society with young journalists, and it'll be a new generation that's going to try and bring about change. 1994, another highlight, Ukraine was the had the third most nuclear weapons, third in the world, and they agreed to sign the Budapest Memorandum. They gave up all their nuclear weapons, and in the process, there was supposed to be a guarantee of keeping sovereignty, allowing for independence, which was not followed. There would be struggles with building a civil society, rule of law. Increasingly, Ukrainians were seeing the European Union as being a better promise for maintaining or developing rule of law, human rights, democracy of that sort. But the authorities at hand were often crushing and arresting. But nonetheless, you had elections. Even the pro-Russian, well, someone who maintained neutrality, Kuchma, wrote a book, Ukraine is not Russia. Get it, guys? Stop it. 2004, the Orange Revolution. Based on the movement used Gene Sharp's, I don't know if you ever heard of Gene Sharp, Peaceful Resistance. And he wrote a book, From Dictatorship to Democracy. I met the person who translated the work into Ukrainian. He's now head of archives of the secret police archives. And so it was a successful, peaceful revolution, but culture is a lot harder to change. And I'm really shortening things. 2013, 2014. In 2013, the corrupt ruler, and we find out that Manafort, yes, was his advisor, among other things, had promised to sign a European Union agreement and did not. Mustafa Naim, an Afghan refugee journalist, other journalists, students started using Facebook, Twitter, and saying, if you don't like this, join us in Maidan. They gathered, and guess what happened? They were beaten. Other people got upset, and soon you have over 500,000 people gathering, all sorts of people. And in reality, many were saying anti-corruption, but the big thing is they were flying European Union flags. They wanted that connection. 2014, the former president leaves, the opposition leaves, and now it's been kind of a new renaissance taking place. They've succeeded in making political candidates publicize their finances, other anti-corruption activities. Young people and others got a chance to travel to the European Union. And so there's been an opening up towards a civic identity. Not a nationalist ethnic identity, but a civic identity. One example is the religious pluralism. That's one of my research areas. An interfaith council gathers every year, and they rotate who leads it, and it includes all sorts of Christians, including Jehovah's Witnesses, Orthodox, Christians, Catholics, Jews, Muslims, and others. So kind of a rise of a civil society. And I think the quintessential example of this was the election of Volodymyr Zelensky, a Russian-speaking person of Jewish background from the southern part of Ukraine. And he really expresses this idea of civic identity, not nationalist, not extreme. There are, and you have to deal with it. But in reality, and then the push from the north has really united the country. And coming back to autocracy, orthodoxy, and nationality, we see the symbols of autocracy. Who's making decisions in Russia? Is there any shared governance? No. KGB buddies sit at a long table, wave these crazy historical fantasies of recreating something from the 19th century. Young people are trying to protest, and what's going on? They're protesting for peace, and they're beaten and arrested. There's even a law that's being put in the books. If you're arrested a second time, you can end up in jail for 20 years. Journalists are being killed. All of this is very cruel and controlling. It really isn't the fault of the Russian people, I will say, but autocracy, and this is what's happening in the world right now. Zelensky brought this up. We have to fight against autocracy. We have to fight for human rights, civic identity in terms of equality, and I think that that's part of it. So we have an autocrat, and you know, that's enough. If you have any questions, I've made my point. I'm only warming up. I could go for another hour.
Hi, everybody. I hope everyone. Wow, what a speech. I hope everyone can hear me on Zoom. Thank you so much, and thank y'all for coming. It really means a lot. My name is Daria. I'm 21 years old, and I come from Ukraine. I was born there, and I lived there for 16 years of my life. And you know, like when this whole event was like happening and organizing, I thought of like, what am I going to talk about? Because I don't really know what to say. Because who would have known, like in the 21st century, it's something massive, something so horrible can happen. Because for the past week, all I've been feeling is obviously like pretty isolated, but for many reasons. And one of them is that I feel like even when I'm going to talk about my feelings and what's going on back home, I'm going to be heard, but some of the information might not be like fully processed. I'm sure like most of you, I grew up like listening to World War II stories. And it's a very big part of like, I guess, growing up in Ukraine. Schools, summer camps, everything is like so intertwined with World War II that in middle school, as a part of like volunteering hours, my classmates and we went to visit this lady. She was a veteran and she was all alone. We brought her food and she started telling us stories because she was all alone and because she didn't have anyone to like vent to about the terror that happened to her. She showed us pictures of her husband that never came back. And, you know, I remember when we left, all we could think about is how grateful we are. We never have to experience anything like that. I honestly don't know how to talk about war. But my grandma does, because it hit me yesterday that it's her second war. She spent her early childhood watching Nazis bomb Ukraine, killing our people, torturing. And now she's going through it all over again, but the people who are fighting against us are the people who we fought back to back with, who we called brothers and sisters. She would always tell me, with tears in her eyes, saying how grateful we all should be to veterans because, well, we can peacefully walk outside in the streets, live our lives, enjoy it. And I'm so sorry she has to go through it all over again. Stories, why would they matter? There's this like article I came across by Harari, who's the author of the book Sapiens, if you know. It's the Guardian article, and he said that nations are built upon stories. Nowadays, everyone is a storyteller. We all go on Instagram, we post, Twitter, Reddit, you name it, TikTok, which has its benefits, right? Because now we're all this like big global community and we share our experiences, like even through pandemic. It really helped us and united us. But on the other hand, it's just media gives so much power, and it gives power to privileged or chosen ones. And it's been really, really hard going online and seeing all these stories. And I'm sure for all of you, but let's be honest, as we watch it all happening online and then we just move on. Because we've seen enough. We've seen enough of these bloody pictures. We've seen enough of it, and we just lose our feelings to it. It just becomes numb because every day we go and scroll on social media, and I don't know how we're gonna give this like not even platform. How are we gonna give this ability to actual war victims to talk about their trauma and being heard without being questioned whether or not their stories are true, because maybe they don't have these pictures to show. I can't stop reading the news. I'm not there. I know I shouldn't, but I'm not there yet because I can't put my phone away and know that my family is like and friends are like safe, because I just want to keep checking. And while being on the phone, reading the news, I've encountered so many videos and so many people sharing their own opinions about what's going on, which includes not only like Russian influencers talking about how Russian soldiers are on a mission to save Ukrainian people from neo-Nazis, and that they're not bombing civilians. Well, every day, my family and friends see people die. And I feel like this is the issue of the 21st century, because, how we can all care. Because once again, social media kind of numbs it. And why would we even all care if it's just happening somewhere there, far away? I don't really know how to answer because it's such a complex issue, especially in Western countries that are built upon individualism. But I feel like maybe we should all care, because that's what our generation is like. We are all left with such a burden of like climate change and wars all over the world, caused by greedy people who they can't give up their throne and their wealthy castles and power. Maybe we should all care because it's the world's issue. As for 80 years, everyone was saying never again. But for the first few days of the war, all of the Western countries seemed to be hesitant and confused, while some children in Kiev and Kharkiv and many other cities were spending their second night underground, falling asleep to the sound of explosions. I think we should all care because it's our future. And, living abroad for 5 years, it has like created this abyss between my family and I. Since I'm just used to seeing them twice a year and talking over the phone most of the time, and it's just, you get used to it. And all I know is like they're far away, somewhere there, 4,000 miles away. And this war has tore it further apart. I don't know what to feel, but now I can't. Every time I tear up every time I think of the warmth of my mom's arms when she hugs me. It's when I returned back home, and then growing up, I just didn't like when my dad would give me advice or just like a lesson whenever I screw up. But now I really need it because I don't know what to do in such challenging times. I cry every night because I remember how in one of my human rights assignments, I wrote that I'm gonna protect and teach like my younger siblings about human rights and just be there for them. And to my siblings, to all the children back home in Ukraine, and to just children in general who had to unfortunately find out what the word war means and looks like, I'm so sorry. I'm truly sorry the war has stolen your childhood moments, forcing you to grow faster. I wish this never occurred. And I'm sorry we failed you, but we're doing our best to protect you and fight for your future and for a bright and peaceful future. I was on the phone with my dad yesterday, just asking him generic questions, how are you? How are kids doing? And he told me that they miss me very much. And they constantly keep asking him, when are they going to see me? Soon, I said. And my dad added, right after our victory. Thank you so much, and Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. Thank you so much to both of you. It's very moving. So we're going to do question and answer until about 1 o'clock. Yulia is not here yet, unfortunately. So if she shows up, we'll switch over to her should she arrive on Zoom. So let's start with, does anyone in the audience in person have a question that they'd like to ask? Or shall I start with the Zoom questions? I'll start with a Zoom question. Hold on. Sorry. Let's see. Okay. Either of you can answer any of these questions. Russia invited Pakistan, China, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, India, Ethiopia, and others into an anti-fascist conference. What does this mean for other countries in the Russian sphere, and what does this mean for Ukraine? 25 minutes.
25 minutes. Well, others will say that the fascist movement is found in Moscow. And,
Oh, no, the mic's just for Zoom.
Oh, okay.
Yes, you have to project.
Many will say that the fascist movement is found in Moscow. I haven't heard of this conference. I'd like to see a reference about this conference as well. We know that the extreme right wing in the United States does praise President Putin for these traditional values. What do these traditional values mean? Anti-LGBTQ activities, domestic abuse. If you've heard of the group Pussy Riot, they were arrested just for standing up for human rights. And so I would need more of I haven't heard of this anti-fascist movement. If anything, it might be a reversal of fighting against other areas. Do you?
Nah, I mean, you got it. It's just, yeah. I mean, I feel like it's so hard to judge and tell because everything is like changing every day. Every day there are new sanctions, every day there are new news. So we're just, I feel like all we can do is just observe.
Right, right.
It sounds like a disinformation campaign. Anyone here have a question? Yes. Okay, here, use the microphone.
Hello, thank you so much for sharing your story and thank you so much for lecturing. This is incredible. So you were talking about different perspectives when it comes to war, talking about different narratives. And so right now, I recently just came back from South Africa. I was doing political work out there. And so I have a lot of comrades out there and we're talking about the Ukrainian war. And I don't know if any of you've seen on the news right now, but there's actually a huge push against the Ukrainian border patrol because currently right now, Ukrainian borders are not letting any African students, migrants, workers who are currently in the Ukraine to flee back to their home countries. And this is a national concern and a great concern, especially because I do a lot of social justice work in the US and I do a lot of social justice internationally. And so it's important that we talk about these narratives who are Black students our age trying to go back to their mothers, fathers, and things like that. But due to racial profiling, racism, that still is in effect, I think it's important that we talk about these issues. So if you have something to speak on that, that'd be great. Thank you.
I can answer because I feel like I have some experience living here and I can compare how different racism is in general, like not only the issue, but how people like understand even the meaning of racism. See, like Ukraine we're pretty much white country and it was like that forever and ever. So unfortunately, and it's true, a lot of people are racist because they just don't know the history because they have their, it's not a big part of our history, Ukrainian history. And unfortunately, that's probably, that's most likely why. So it's quite incredible how in the past like 5-10 years maybe we had a lot of people coming in because it wasn't the case at all. And I guess people are still getting used to the fact that there are other people from other countries in Ukraine right now. So I feel like we do have to talk about it. And yeah, great that you mentioned.
Well, also the government has had an answer to what's going on and people are being let go. And one of the answers was given by a gold medal wrestler, Olympic wrestler, who's an Afro-Ukrainian member of parliament. And so that is an issue, but it's a tough one. And admittedly, it has to be brought up if you have a civic engagement, civil society. I can give an example how an Afro-Ukrainian woman was selected to perform popularly in Eurovision, but that still doesn't excuse what's going on as well. So in a civil society, these issues do have to be addressed, no doubt.
Okay, this is from Kristen McCune, Zenon, one of your former students, and she wants to know, how can we help? So what websites should we go to? What groups?
Well, I think Daria can share, there are a number of sources, and KT, if you contact me, and I know we're in contact, I can send you some information in terms of where you can donate as well. And I think there was a site I shared where they offer, but I think even the Red Cross is taking money, donations, Doctors Without Borders, and others as well. But maybe you can share your link.
Yeah, sure. I don't know where Yulia is at because I know she organized this whole like volunteer health thing, so I'm not really I don't really have much information in that. However, there are plenty of donation. Well, actually, it's quite hard because like you would think, oh, what if it's a scam? Because unfortunately, I don't know how, but people like that exist who scam in such hard times. But I think it's we have our Patreon and then we have like Save Ukraine. I actually in my Instagram, I have it in my bio and I have it in like stories. You can, if you want to know, or just like message me, email me, come up to me. I can give you sources if you need. So yeah.
Maybe we can get something up on department websites, perhaps. Okay, thank you. This is another question from Zoom, and then we'll do another from the audience here. This is a tough question, so I think maybe impossible to answer. What is your opinion as to how this disaster ends, let's say 6 months out?
It's nice being a historian because we just pick up the pieces afterwards. And most people who speculate, social scientists were wrong, political scientists were wrong, military people were wrong as well. But what people are really amazed with, and Daria, you can follow up on this, is just the civic engagement all across the country. It doesn't matter where you are, whether it's in Mariupol, Kharkiv, east, south, west. I don't know if you've been following, people are placing their bodies in front of Russian tanks. Breweries have switched to making Molotov cocktails, and apparently they're calling it Ukrainian smoothies. I don't want to make light of it, but there's just this huge uprising that even if there's a military success, the population is not going to, and again, I stay up until 1 or 2 in the morning getting these live feeds. My academic friends send daily updates. They're scared for their lives. I mean, there's a hit list, and they're starting to hit cultural artifacts, UNESCO cultural sites. That's part of how they're trying to get rid of this narrative that there's a separate Ukraine. But please, why don't you follow up on, the resistance TV?
Yeah, sure. I think it's like when it first started, I know a lot of people who live abroad, we were all we're still scared. It's just we got used to it, kind of. It's been a week. But what we saw is something that we didn't expect, is that how united not only Ukrainian people became and still are, but everyone is now involved. And it's crazy because in my city, for example, I know everyone is working. Everyone is a volunteer. My mom would message me like, we did that and that. And like, it's really empowering to watch this happen. And yeah, we're really grateful for everyone who's helping us.
And again, part of it is back from 2014, this desire to be part of the European Union. And I think it's a generational difference as well, where you have younger people part of the Anti-Corruption League. And you know the history of the president, President Zelensky. He started as a TV actor, even won Dancing with the Stars in Ukraine, but he played the role of a history teacher who was in the TV series, who starts complaining about corruption and whatever else to change what's going on. But that's a whole other thing.
There is a next question on Zelensky, but let's get, I think I saw it. Yes. I feel like Phil Donahue. None of you know who that is, so speak loudly.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much. Hearing your personal story and like someone who's experiencing this like firsthand is just really, really empowering. And so thank you for being so brave to say what you said. I've talked to a lot of people about this war in regard to social media, and that this is like the first war we have seen so much engagement with social media. And there's a lot of ways in that people are trying to be involved. I think we saw it a lot with like BLM, that people are doing a lot of shock kind of like tactics to get people involved into matters, where there's just very brutal images just like constantly being shoved in people's faces. And it kind of goes along with the question, like, what can we do just like personally from you, like experiencing this war, what do you think about this way of involving yourself, of like this kind of like shock images and awareness in that way that isn't necessarily productive, but it's informative, you know?
Thank you so much for the question. I feel like I personally chose not to stay silent on social media because I just want to educate and show and spread awareness about what's going on back home. And I know I heard a lot of people saying and just like, why would I post? Why would I do that? Because like it's just social media. Everyone posts and it just becomes redundant. But I think what's most important, like as for example, for me, because I can't do much, all I can do is just donate or like call my parents and friends and I honestly I felt and I still feel guilty because I wake up here and I'm safe. But I guess it's like up to everyone if you want to help. There are sources, there are donations. We can organize maybe some sort of like charity where you can bring some basic stuff and I'll just send it because I have addresses where you can send it. If we all ready and want to do that, that would be awesome.
Well,
But,
maybe we
yeah.
can use the history department link.
Yeah.
I got contacted by Binghamton University asking for same things in terms of links and assessment. So maybe we could do that as well.
That's a great idea. I've got a question on essentially, tell us about the role of Zelensky and a little bit about who he is and what explains how he's doing what he's doing.
So like briefly as mentioned, like we struggle, and as I remember growing up, we struggled a lot with the presidents who would just steal and not give anything to civilians. So after the revolution in 2014, we had like a few presidents. One was for a year, the other one was also like corrupted. So then Zelensky, who is he's a stand-up comedian. Like he made this show about him as a history teacher becoming a president and just speaking the truth. And everyone was like, yeah, let's do it. And we did it. And you know what? A lot of people were very judgmental about that. No one knew what's going to happen, but he's relatively young compared to other candidates. So we had hope. And he was doing pretty much all right. Then COVID hit, and we all know it was a disaster for everyone, like every country. But when I think the war started, the reason why everyone was like hesitant and scared is because we kind of expected that he's just going to leave us like everyone else did. But he stayed and he's in Kiev. And that was the major power move for everyone to get up and start doing something. So I think he's a great leader, personal opinion.
And he has a great presidential website, and he gives updates twice a day, among other things. So very transparent, and his people are also very transparent. It's kind of a coming in of a new, different generation that it represents. Unlike the Kremlin, where people sit behind a long, long table. It's people back from the KGB days, don't challenge. I don't know if you've seen any of the scenes. So one famous picture now is Putin at a long table, even staying away from his own trusted KGB generals. And Zelensky's in the trenches. He has a flak jacket, a helmet, and kind of inspiring people as well. So
Let me just, we're going to keep going. I know those of you who have 110 classes or need to go, why don't you all head out now, and the rest, anyone who can stay, we'll field more questions, and likewise, everyone on Zoom, please feel free to stay if you can. Is that okay? I didn't ask if you have a class. I didn't ask if you had a class today. Okay, thanks those of you who could stay. So we have time for about 15 more minutes of questions or comments. Yes. Hey, I'll give you a microphone.
Thank you. Thanks again, y'all, for putting on this presentation. This is awesome. My question is basically, with historical context, do you see a way out of this that doesn't involve a foreign military rolling through Ukraine? Like, is there a true possibility for Ukrainian neutrality that's resolved without either U.S. or NATO intervention? And is Russia ever going to be willing to accept that, do you think? So.
I honestly don't know because it's really hard to tell right now. And all I know is that like NATO involvement possibly right now is not a great idea because both countries have nuclear power and that's a disastrous thing. But I guess we just can, what I can do is I just read the news and I watch how things are. We're currently doing not as bad. I think we're doing pretty much okay, especially with like help, military help, humanitarian help. But the problem is when the Russia is going to understand and stop, because their soldiers are dying, and like their president is not admitting that. They're either dead in Ukrainian fields or they bring it back to Crimea when they just burn them, and that's horrible because what are they going to tell to the people, to their parents?
Well, and that's the hard thing as well. Many of these are 18-year-old Russians who were drafted and were being told that they're just going on maneuvers. They don't know why they're there. And many are surrendering, many are booby trapping things, but you still do have Russian special forces who are very well disciplined. And if when the young Russians demonstrate in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, and elsewhere, if the adults would just come out and support them. Moscow has a population of over 10 million. It shouldn't just be a few hundred or a few thousand young people sticking their heads out. It should be 1 million people out. That's what happened in 2013, 2014, when they saw their kids beaten up in Kiev. The people just came out and gave them support. And so I think something like that would be critical. We can't have, if any NATO forces came into Ukraine to fight, it would be horrible. That would be World War III. I know it's tough, right, to see, but that's the reality. But I think civic engagement, civic disobedience. No, poor Belarus. Remember the elections from almost 2 years ago? Massive protests, hundreds of thousands of people protesting, and it was just bashed. Peaceful protesters beat up. And now you have Lukashenko, the president, collaborating in all of this as well. I don't know if that answers it, but.
Let's see. There was a question on Zoom earlier. Can you please help put into context the current war and the Crimea occupation of 2014? Was there similar civic resistance? What are the two separatist groups and how large are they relative to the size of the Ukrainian population?
I'm not that like, I feel like when the government was overthrown in 2013, 2014, the Russian president saw it as a possibility to like take the Crimea away. Also, like, I think he witnessed that there wasn't that much resistance because no one was ready and the country was like in chaos. Russian president just wanted to take what he claimed was theirs. And which is like, all right, what? It was like, I remember I was like 13, 14. It was just so tough to watch because, well, also like as a teenager, you don't really understand much what's going on in the media, a lot of disinformation. And especially since the government we overthrew was under the puppets regime, we didn't get much news and things to hear, learn, and observe. However, I know that a lot of people flee to Ukraine from Crimea, especially their native people, native Crimean people who already were thrown away once from Crimea because of Russian government. So yeah, that's why I think this whole war also like happened, because it has been going on for 8 years.
The indigenous population of Crimea are Muslim Tatars. After the Second World War, they were all deported. And then with independence in Ukraine, many started coming back and were supportive of remaining part of Ukraine. And so that's a historical piece in terms of what role should indigenous people play. And part of the Crimea is that it had many naval bases. And so that was also a military interest. With the eastern regions, they're a small part of the country, and 1.5 million people became refugees after the Little Green Men went in there as well. So politically speaking, Putin made a big mistake taking Crimea because that's where you had pro-Russian voters. Do you see what I'm getting at? And they had a lot more autonomy under Ukraine than they do now as well. And with the far eastern regions, it's a slice, but the fighting is still going on there. And I think all of us thought if there would be any type of military intervention, it would just be in those far eastern regions. They recognize those two republics. You have a similar situation in Moldova with the Transnistrian Republic. Same thing in Georgia with Ossetia and the other regions kind of having this stuff. And Zelensky said, Putin was telling Macron, Johnson, Biden, you people are delirious. We're never going to invade. You're making up stories. So what do you believe?
Yeah, because for the past, before last week, like since I came here after the winter break, a lot of people were asking me my opinion about the war. And you know what I said? I said, it's not going to happen. We had it in 2014. And like, we've been, like, it's been in war. My country's been in war since like 24, it's been going on there. So it didn't feel like something as major and horrible like that can ever happen.
Well, and again, the scary thing is using history as a tool that's taking place now to recreate an imagined Russian empire from the late 19th century to such a degree, and how the leadership is really cut off, I would say, from reality. And so they'll say NATO, and that's a concern as well, but it's really this narrative. In Ukraine, scholars started writing from a post-colonial perspective, and now we're starting up with neo-colonialism as well.
So I think we have time for maybe one more question. Hey, I'll get the mic to you. Don't act surprised. Good to see you.
So I saw this film Maidan by Sergei Nonchevsky, and it sort of like documents the year Maidan that happened in 2013, 2014. And so I wanted to sort of like try to explain how that connects with like that transition period between that whole trying to protest for getting into the EU and against corruption, and then how that like transitions into the attack in Crimea. And then I also wanted to ask a second question. So I've been sort of following this thing, and I follow soccer a lot, and a lot of the sanctions, like UEFA took out. It's not going to be in Champions League. It's not going to be in St. Petersburg. All the FIFA and UEFA have agreed that they will, eliminate all the Russian countries from all the competitions. And, like Manchester United, I know they like canceled their partnership with Aeroflight, which is, a lot of companies that are there, and Gazprom and all these things. And, a lot of the countries, they're sort of doing sanctions like this instead of like taking up, arms or something, which means, it's a financial hit on Russia. But at the same time, if you have, Putin with his little group, then they might not care about these impacts. So do you think that like, this approach, this, sanctions instead of like taking arms approach might actually be effective? Or do you think that, Putin doesn't really care how the Russian people get impacted because he just has his little group and his only ambition is just, politics or, trying to do whatever he wants to do?
Thank you.
Thank you for this question. Yeah, you're right. He doesn't care, because one thing I've been monitoring is also the, $1 is equals to like 115 Russian rubles, and their economy is just really bad. Like, it hasn't been like I don't know. The last time I saw this happening probably was like in the 90s, and that's horrible. Why? Because now people, the product, the food products, everything is gonna kind of end because of the sanctions in Russia. I don't know how they're gonna like get out of it, because they have such a major impact on not only the economy but everything they're producing there. I don't know what Putin is think he's gonna do about it, but all I can add is that I think sanctions can help, but it took a while since they started putting up all these sanctions. I've only been seeing it happening for the past like 3 days. So we're hoping for more help. And you're gonna address the first.
Well, no, and the Ukrainian parliament started a process of de-oligarchization, meaning those with the extreme wealth, targeting them in terms of where their money is coming from. And already, to run for office in Ukraine, you have to show your finances. Unlike some major candidate in the 2016 election who did not in the United States, I'm sorry. And you do know that his advisor Manafort was arrested based on documents found in the former Ukrainian president's palace due to journalists and historians gathering the materials together. And so I don't like oligarchs of all nationalities, to be quite honest with you. In my news class, I say, like, we do a piece on inequality in the world, and it's I was going to say obscene, it is, but so much control. And in the post-Soviet space, they got that wealth opaquely. I mean, and often it was party members who knew where all the wealth was. They took it all over, and then you've heard of the term London grad. A lot of property was purchased there, and correspondent asked Johnson, "Are you going to do something about this?" And it's really corrupt as well. So I don't know if that answers it, but I think any pressure is good. But still, when you have an isolate, and that's the problem with autocracy or authoritarianism anywhere. I mean, look at January 6th. I'm a big fan of Timothy Snyder, the historian. He brings this to light. And so, well, I'm going to go on a rant, though. That's it.
We have time for one more question, and then I think we'll close up. Hi. Thank you.
Thank you for taking one more question. Hi, Zenon. Zenon, I'm not sure if you know this about me, that roughly in 1960, the U.S. Defense Department recognized me as a conscientious objector. And as a conscientious objector, as a pacifist, I had to say that I'm opposed to all war. It wasn't a looming Vietnam War that I was opposed to. So, and once you're a conscientious objector, I think it's an obligation I have to being always a throughout my life. I don't think things ended when I served my 2 years of alternative service, actually digging wells in East Africa. So, so my question for you is I've been involved in civil disobedience, civic resistance, nonviolence my whole life. Is there a role for any of these in Ukraine? Not in Russia. I don't want you to think about whether there's a role for pacifists in Russia to deal with this in the streets at this moment. But is there a nonviolent solution in a situation where we're in the midst of a war? And I feel, frankly, I do feel tested as a pacifist in moments like this.
I'm a big fan of Gene Sharp, and I introduced it in my revolutions class. Gene Sharp he has a list, 198 nonviolent waves of resistance. And in 2004 and in 2013-14 in Ukraine, it was, the moral high ground. It happened in Serbia, right, Dusan? That's how Milosevic was taken down through this specific way. I think we have all of that self-defense, but peace still has to be a message that the goal somehow is to respect others, to have a peaceful life. I mean, Zelensky's in a tough spot because if the Russians do as they please, it's tough. But maybe something can happen in Russia, and in a way, when you have young Russian soldiers saying, what's going on in parallels with Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, there was a Russian mothers movement. It was the Russian mothers who kind of played a big role, and I think that might be starting up. And again, with Gene Sharp, dictators started pushing back in terms of trying to take that might need to happen if Russia does win militarily, then I think that has to civil disobedience. There's a plan. And I really respect you, and I respect people who are for peace, but it's just so hard now, right?
Yeah, I don't have much to say. It's just I feel like if only Russian soldiers did shoot and send their bombs, missiles to military infrastructure. And that was I read so many articles from different perspectives, and that was supposed to be Russia's president's plan, to destroy infrastructure, military areas and infrastructure, to overthrow Kiev and the government, and to put someone he's gonna like more. But I think he's failing because his soldiers are now shooting into civilians, and the fact that there are 16 or maybe now even more children dead, that's just, I wish it never happened. And I wish there was another way to solve the issue, because I don't think it should be like that. I don't think Russian soldiers should be dying. They're 18 years old. Because Putin they're not protecting their country. They're protecting oligarchs' regime. He just threw them there, and now there are a lot of them dead because of him. And I don't know how to live with that. So I'm sorry. I wish there was another way to solve it.
It's not as much as you, because you have direct family, you have distant relatives, but just hearing from academics, there's one person from my mom's hometown, Andriy Mironyuk, who's a public historian. He's 20 years old. It's as if someone were going to be working in the history center. Now, I'd learn a lot of stuff. But now he and others have gotten hunting rifles. That's how they're defending themselves, hunting rifles. And initially were to protect the train station. And then he announced it is safe because it'll be another passageway for refugees to go through. And again, I wait for responses, and academics are terrified in terms of what may happen to them. And you have to realize with the religious organizations, The Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine was destroyed under the Tsars. They just abolished it. When Stalin came into Western Ukraine, once again abolished. It didn't come about until 1991. And now the Greek Catholic Church leadership is afraid that they'll go after the church. There's actually fear that these UNESCO sites might be bombed, and it's already happening. It's already happening. These historical, cultural sites are being bombed, and that they might even go after these other historic places. So it's a lot of angst. But it's important that people there know that other people care. You know, they wait just to say hi.
Thank you very much to Daria and Zenon. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Thank you, everyone joining us from around the world on Zoom. Thank you.